Hello, everyone. At the exact moment when Washington believed it still controlled the situation, everything shifted suddenly. In a single address delivered with calm precision and confidence, Mark Carney did something that very few global figures have attempted in years. He placed the United States on a defined timeline, not a warning, not extended negotiations, but a firm deadline of 14 days. What followed inside the White House was a period of quiet concern. This was no longer routine diplomacy. It reflected a shift in control happening in real time. For the first time in a long while, the United States was not setting the terms. This situation did not emerge overnight. Over the past several weeks, pressure had been building behind closed doors. The United States had applied tariffs, warnings, and firm language designed to push Canada toward agreement. The expectation in Washington was straightforward. Canada would eventually give in, as it had before. But this time was different. Carney was not reacting, he was preparing. Every move, every pause, every response was part of a broader plan that few in Washington fully recognized until it was already in motion. When Carney addressed Parliament, his tone was steady, without theatrics or emotional appeal. That composure made the message more serious. He outlined the situation with clarity, leaving no room for confusion. Canada had shown patience and acted carefully, but that period had ended. The moment had arrived for decisive action. Carney did not ask for dialogue. He presented immediate requirements. 5 specific conditions aimed directly at key areas of U.S. influence: removing tariffs, restoring defense commitments, respecting Canadian sovereignty, addressing financial impacts, and recognizing control over resources. These were not symbolic demands. They were structured to force a response. Then came the timeline: 14 days. Not months of discussion, but a short, defined window that created urgency. He made it clear that if the terms were not met, Canada would move forward. That single statement changed how the situation was viewed within Washington. The reaction was immediate, though not public. Advisors worked quickly to assess whether this was a strategic signal or a serious plan. Intelligence teams reviewed Canada's recent activity. Economic analysts examined trade flows. Defense experts evaluated potential risks. A conclusion began to take shape. This was credible. What made it different was preparation. Canada had not only issued a deadline, it had positioned itself to act on it. In the weeks leading up to this moment, alternative trade routes, energy partnerships, and diplomatic ties had been quietly strengthened. Dependence had been reduced while leverage increased. Inside the White House, the response required careful timing. Acting too quickly could signal weakness, while delaying too long could increase pressure. Rejecting the conditions carried consequences, but accepting them could have political costs. This created a complex situation by design. What made it more significant was that it unfolded publicly. This was not a private negotiation. It was presented openly and broadcast globally. Each point communicated a message not just to the United States, but to allies, markets, and observers worldwide. It raised a broader question about influence and who sets the direction moving forward. For years, the balance had remained relatively stable, but now it was being tested in a structured and deliberate way. And this moment was only the beginning. What intensified the situation further was what followed the announcement. After presenting the conditions, Carney did not pause or invite extended negotiation. Instead, he outlined potential outcomes: clear, detailed, and immediate. This signaled that the response had already been organized. If the deadline passed without agreement, multiple actions could be initiated at once, creating pressure across several areas simultaneously. The first signal involved energy. Canada is a major supplier of oil, gas, and electricity to the United States. Carney indicated that these flows depend on conditions, and if those conditions are not met, they could be redirected rather than stopped. That distinction had immediate implications. Even partial changes in energy flow can affect prices, supply chains, and industrial operations quickly. What made the statement more impactful was that alternative buyers had already been explored. Discussions with Europe and signals toward Asia suggested preparation was already underway. This was not theoretical. It was supported by planning. Trade came next. The long-standing North American trade framework has provided stability, reduced tariffs, and allowed businesses on both sides to operate with predictability. Carney made it clear that this structure is not guaranteed. If conditions are not met, Canada could reconsider its position. That would mean the return of tariffs, rising costs, and disruption to supply chains built over years. Businesses would be forced to adjust, and once adjustments begin, returning to previous systems becomes difficult. Companies tend to move forward, not backward, when adapting to change. Then came access, airspace, shipping routes, and transit corridors that have supported both commercial and strategic movement for decades. These pathways reduce time, cost, and complexity. For the first time, their availability was framed as conditional. Limits on access would create delays, increase costs, and affect industries that rely on efficient movement. This shift would extend beyond economics into operational planning. When access becomes uncertain, coordination becomes more difficult. The financial dimension followed. Carney referenced capital flows, investments, and long-term financial connections that link both economies. The idea of gradually reducing those ties introduces a different kind of pressure. Not immediate disruption, but a steady shift over time. This type of movement is harder to counter because it develops gradually and gains momentum before it becomes fully visible. What made the overall strategy notable was its structure. These actions were not presented as isolated possibilities, they were layered. Energy creates immediate pressure. Trade increases it. Access complicates response. Finance extends the impact over time. Inside Washington, discussions became more urgent. Advisors were no longer asking if action would be taken, but how quickly it could begin and how to respond once it did. The timeline itself changed the dynamic. It removed flexibility, increased urgency, and required decisions under pressure. As the situation developed, global reaction added another layer. Within hours, it became clear this was not limited to two countries. Signals from Europe appeared quickly, measured, coordinated, and aligned in tone. While formal in language, they indicated broader awareness and possible prior discussions. This suggested Canada was not acting alone. That realization affected assumptions in Washington, where the expectation had been that Canada would face isolation. Instead, there were signs of support, and support changes risk calculations. Markets also reacted. Volatility increased as investors responded to potential disruption in energy, trade, and financial systems. Markets react to risk, and the speed of movement reflected how seriously the situation was being considered. Energy sectors responded first, followed by financial markets and trade-linked industries. Inside the White House, the pace intensified. Multiple teams worked simultaneously. Economic advisors analyzing supply chains, security officials reviewing strategic implications, and financial experts assessing exposure. Each option carried risk. A strong response could escalate the situation. Delayed action could increase pressure. Partial agreement might not prevent outcomes. There was no simple solution. Security concerns added further complexity. Long-standing coordination systems depend on trust and integration built over decades. Disruption in those systems can affect monitoring, coordination, and response times. Rebuilding such systems takes time, not days or weeks. This made the situation particularly sensitive from a strategic standpoint. At the same time, internal pressure within the United States increased. Policymakers, analysts, and industry leaders began evaluating the implications more openly. Businesses connected to cross-border operations faced uncertainty about planning and stability. As the 14-day deadline approached, the pressure intensified. Each passing hour increased uncertainty while reducing the number of available options. Three possible outcomes began to take shape. The first scenario is full agreement, where the United States meets all conditions. This would stabilize the situation quickly but could influence how future negotiations are perceived. The second scenario is partial agreement, where some conditions are met. This may reduce immediate pressure but could still trigger certain responses, leading to ongoing uncertainty. The third scenario is full rejection, where no agreement is reached and Canada proceeds with its outlined actions. In that case, changes across energy, trade, finance, and coordination could begin quickly, with broader effects across markets and partnerships. As the timeline continues, the situation moves closer to a decision point. The deadline is no longer just a date. It represents a moment where outcomes become real. The window for decision making remains open, but it is narrowing. Once that window closes, the effects may be difficult to reverse quickly. Systems disrupted do not reset instantly, and trust once affected takes time to rebuild. Mark Carney's move was structured, deliberate, and public. The United States now faces a defined choice. Each option carries consequences, and each delay increases pressure. 14 days represent a short period, but the decisions made within that time could influence what follows well beyond it.